Organization for Migration, who is here to talk to you about the latest casualty figures regarding migrants. Leonard, welcome to this podium, and it's all yours.
Is this all turned on, yeah?
Yeah, it is.
Great. Well, it's not too long ago when I was on that side, torturing people on this side, so I look forward to your grilling.
Yeah.
Exactly. Really terrific to be here. Real pleasure. So the International Organization for Migration last year did something unusual. We provided the first count, the first global count of migrants dying on the migratory route. People who are dying either in deserts, at sea. And we were surprised as anybody that this had never been done before. And the figure which we arrived at last year was 2,378 migrants. We knew it was a guess. I mean, it was a good estimate rather than a guess, because we knew that there were big areas of the world uncovered. For example, East Africa. Academics suggest there's up to 5,000 migrants die alone on the trek up the coast of East Africa, across Djibouti into Ethiopia, and so on. So this, in the course of the year, we've put a lot more effort into it, and we've produced a book called Fatal Journeys, some research which will be launched on Friday here in Conference Room E at 10 o'clock. And on International Migrants Day, we'll again produce updated figures over and above our report of last year. And I can give you an inkling of what that's going to be. I mean, it's pretty dramatic in our view. It shows that a near on doubling of the numbers we counted last year have died this year attempting to cross borders. Now, we know it's not perfect, our count, because at the end of the day we're relying primarily on media coverage. Governments tend not to count or report deaths of migrants. So it's by and large media. The US government does report very well. The Border Patrol produces an annual report. But we are working as best we can using publicly available sources, but also encouraging NGOs to join us, encouraging the media to join us, so that we can draw more attention to this truly horrific episode. Of course, the worst place, as you all already know, this year has been the Mediterranean, where the numbers have gone to over 3,000, maybe 3,100, which is a tripling of the figure from last year. And that's not stopping. I mean, as of this week, we've had more landings off the southern coast of Italy from right across North Africa, from Libya, from Egypt, and the people who are coming are Syrians on the one hand, sub-Saharan Africans, and a number were again lost over this last weekend. At least 12 people drifted away after their rubber vessel sank. We are drawing attention to the really shockingly cynical treatment of these migrants, primarily by smuggling groups. We think that they're making up to $2 million per large shipment of migrants. One of the shipments last weekend was 900 migrants came ashore. So that is not a bad rate of return in today's tough economy. In fact, it's the same rate of return, if not higher, as was made in the slave period when banks in New York were financing slave ships. They were paying $20,000 to have them built, and they were pulling in $1 million per slave ship. So the rate of return isn't far off the mark. We're surprised that there's not more public interest, more public indignation. We're surprised there's not more investigation into the deliberate drowning of migrants in September. Some 500 were lost when their ship was rammed by smugglers because of a dispute with the captain. Now, it's difficult to investigate and prosecute because it's happening in international waters. The people who died then were primarily Palestinians who'd left Gaza. But that's it. We're bringing attention to that problem.
Great. Thank you very much.
Hope I didn't go on too long.
Perfect amount. You should be an example to other guests that I have. Evelyn.
Mr. Doyle, Mr. Leonard.
Oh my
Doyle,
goodness,
welcome.
Evelyn.
Nice to see you again. Who is doing the smuggling? Do you have any idea? And aside from the Mediterranean, is it only conflict areas that people are leaving, or for economic reasons, or deserts drying up, or
All of that, yeah.
or all of that? Yeah.
Well, it really is all of the above. But let's start with the first part of the question: who's doing it? I mean, when the 500, it was between 300 and 500, depending on who survived, depending on the 6 survivors who survived the vessel that was deliberately sunk in September. So they were primarily Palestinians. And they were people who'd received small grants, $2,000, after the conflict to get new housing. Instead, they spent the money getting out of there. That's what it looked like. I mean, there were some really terrible stories there. They would go effectively to a travel agent, which was clearly a smuggling ring, and find their way on very organized buses which took them to Alexandria, and then they were put on the boats. One Palestinian family that had left Gaza because of a dispute with Hamas lost, I think, 23 members of one family. That's been widely reported by the BBC. So, in the recent case, we've got arrivals from sub-Saharan Africa. You know, new arrivals, 13 separate operations, sub-Saharan Africa, from the Gambia, Mali, Senegal, Nigeria, and Ghana. Those who come through Libya tend to be from sub-Saharan Africa. Those who come through Egypt tend to be from further east.
Thank you.
Sorry,
Did I forget to answer one of your questions?
do you know who the smugglers are?
Well, it's a good question. Sorry, I'll just detain you on that. For that particular case, we put some effort into investigating it or looking at it. The smugglers are recruiting their passengers through Facebook. And research by IOM shows that, you know, across the African continent there may be, we know of at least 50 Facebook pages which are advertising the services of smugglers to get people somewhere else. I mean, the authorities know this too. Sometimes the smugglers are foolish enough to put the time and place of departure, and if they can move fast enough, the authorities then round up the smugglers, although that does not happen nearly often enough.
I forgot to welcome you, though, on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association. And thanks for the briefing.
Thanks so much, Evan. It's a real pleasure. Yeah.
Errol and Matthew.
Thanks, Stefan. Mr. Doyle, did I understand you well when you said, thanks to the media reports, some government do not present the real figures on the casualties?
They're not linked, sorry.
And also, what about other casualties? Are they all casualties that are going over the Mediterranean Sea, or do you have figures for some others? Even now, we have some continental migrations in Europe or within Europe, and did you address, or would you like to address that as well?
Yeah, so, sorry, if I confused the two, wasn't my intention. So the media produces, you know, really good information, and that's largely what we're relying on.
Oh, okay.
So it's primarily media reporting, but also some governments, including the US government, has very good figures on it. The Europeans do not report deaths, which we think is not very wise. They certainly report landings. And we're reporting, not of course just in Europe, we're recovering globally to the extent possible. So we report, there's been a decrease in the numbers of deaths on the US borders this year, which is relatively well known. The Mediterranean has spiked at least threefold. Off the coast of Australia, there are 0 recorded deaths, but that's not necessarily telling you the whole story. It just tells you that nobody has been recorded dying within sight of Christmas Island. But we have no knowledge, but we have our suspicions about what's happening further out at sea in international waters. So it's a murky area, to say the least, but we are doing what we can to focus international attention on it.
Matthew?
Sure. Thanks a lot. Matthew Lee, Intercity Press.
Oh, my goodness,
Uh,
no.
On behalf of the Free UN Coalition for Access, thanks for the briefing. I wanted to ask you one IOM-specific question and one more general one. Is IOM involved in the repatriation of Rohingya from Bangladesh in any way? I saw that IOM was the source for some description of the country's policy of trying to inter and in turn return Rohingya to Myanmar. And I wanted to know what does IOM do on this issue, and do you have any figures for death of Rohingyas both leaving and returning? And the more general one was just this question of financing. Who's doing the financing? Are these private individuals? Who kind of finances these the travel? How far up the chain can you track it? Are there publicly traded banks that do it? Are there just affluent individuals? Where does it stand in terms of actually pointing the finger? Thanks.
Sure. Well, on the Rohingya, I'll probably have to come back to you. But in general, IOM, facilitates the humanitarian treatment of people in distress. We certainly don't get involved in any deportations, if that's your suggestion. On the contrary, absolutely something we don't do. But I can come back to you on numbers. But in regard to the specifics of the, I think what you're saying is who benefits rather than who finances, because the financing is happening. The people who are financing these travel are the individuals who are selling the family farm or whatever they can get their hands on. Who benefits is very hard to tell, but there's a lot of money involved, and one can only imagine with the numbers of people who are crossing the Mediterranean in particular. It's 160,000 more this year alone. That's not a bad piece of change, and there's going to be many layers within a society that will need to facilitate and need to make that for that to happen. But we don't know of any. If you're asking, do we know of any corporations, government officials, what have you? We don't. The investigative side would have to be left to the authorities locally, or perhaps to Interpol.
Good.
Thank you. You mentioned there is a lot of deaths coming in the Mediterranean, and you mentioned the Syrians, a lot of people coming from Syria. What has been the impact of ISIS on migration from the IOM? I understand that you guys had a report in Iraq about the number of people that have been displaced. About 2 million people was reached this week. What have you seen in terms of that particular issue, in terms of migration and people moving around in the region?
I think what we can speak to is that the nationalities or the ethnic background of the people who are getting across and who survive seems to track the spikes in different conflicts. So earlier this year, for the first time, we were seeing lots of Palestinians after the conflict. Iraqis' numbers are increasing, large numbers of Syrians, and also that's possibly a function of the fact that they're relatively well off compared to the sub-Saharan Africans, so they can get on the boats. They can pay the $2,500 or more that's required. Those who pay less, the Africans, many of the sub-Saharan Africans are paying $700, and they're shoved in the hold of the vessels, where many of them die, they asphyxiate, or if they refuse to get in, they get stabbed. And we've reported on this over the summer.
Can I do a quick follow-up? The IOM have seen a direct impact from the activity of from ISIS in terms of the way migration has changed in the region?
I don't think we can point to any specific ISIS-related, but clearly the problems of the region, the problems of Iraq and Syria are creating waves and waves of departures. Whether that's directly, specifically linked to ISIS, it's hard for us to say.
Stefano, then Masood.
Yes. Thank you, Stefano Vaccare, La Voce di New York and Radio Radicale in Rome. If I understood well, in your brief presentation, you point some finger on who should investigate those organizations or smugglers, whatever organize those trips. You say, I think, again, you say something is not done. It's not done enough. Who should do something is not doing it. My question is this, and it was a question I asked before. We discovering that there is a lot of business going on around these trips, and it's not only with actually the smuggler leaving Africa, but it's also who take care then of these people when they land. In Italy, just yesterday, there's been a lot of arrests that they said that the mafia is involved. And my question is, do you have a specific, your organization has specific advices on the investigation, how should be conducted, how this trade, human being trade should be stopped? Or already there are their interests, they are so high that it's difficult to stop the business around that?
I think we need to distinguish between trafficking of unwilling victims who are exploited and smuggling of people who want to and desperately need to leave. So, you know, the people who are traveling are giving every penny they've got in order to get across the Mediterranean in this case. And these people are being smuggled. It may turn out that as they're being smuggled that they're also exploited and in some cases killed, whatever. But it's they're very much willing participants in this. They're trying to flee violence, economic collapse, whatever it is. They're not trafficking victims in the classic case. Although there may be trafficking victims on these vessels, there's certainly mixed migration flows.
Sorry, Masood.
Yes. No, yes. Just my question. Sorry if I wasn't clear. The question was: if it's not enough done yet. What should be done to stop this?
Well, I mean, I think part of the problem is that these people are from countries which are in crisis, or are in difficulties, to say the least. If 500 people from my country, small as it is, or bigger countries, were lost in what seems to be a deliberate drowning of people, one can be sure that many, many more efforts would have been taken to get to the bottom of it. But tragically, these people seem to be the most vulnerable, the weakest, and the people who are at the brunt of xenophobia and dislike, shall we say, in Europe. So there seems to be not a sufficient political coming together to stop this wave of tragedy after tragedies, and we think it is an absolute outrage that in this day and age, 3,000 plus people have drowned in the Mediterranean, and close on 5,000 people worldwide.
Follow up?
One second, I'll come back to you. Masood,
Yes, sir. I want
your microphone, please.
this, especially in the recent years, that there has been increase of killing of, not killing, rather, these people migrating in through the Mediterranean, dying. Now, especially Palestinian. Now, in this case, do you have any figures as to, in this year, how many Palestinians died, and last year, because there were none before that? So do you have any figures? And then also, where are they escaping to? Where are they going? From Gaza, where are they going? Do you have, huh?
Wait, just let our guest answer.
So okay.
Yes, sir. And that is basically it. Do you have any figures as to where most of these people are going to? Most of the people. Is it only to Italy, or are they going to England? Are they going somewhere else?
Sure. The numbers of Palestinians this year, we don't know the full story because many of them get through unregistered. But those who died, we know certainly from this vessel in March that most of those were Palestinians. But they're by no means the largest number. The largest numbers have tended to be from Eritrea. So Eritrea is perhaps the one case in the world today where due to political repression, people are leaving, as opposed to natural disasters, economic collapse, although that could be part of it, or to war. Where are they going to? Well, they tend to, once they land, particularly in Italy, they tend to hightail it out of there pretty quickly and go north. And they tend not to stay in Italy.
They're migrating for better economic situation elsewhere, wherever they're going.
Well,
In
they
case of
may be trying
Palestinians-
to reach
yeah.
relatives. Some who have relatives in the UK may try and reach the UK. A lot of them end up stuck in Sangatte in Calais. Some may go to Norway, to Sweden. It very much depends on where they have a place, a safe place to go.
Okay.
Thank
What
you. IPS?
Hi, Roger Hamilton Martin for IPS. Thanks for the briefing. I wanted to ask, what does the IOM think about the decision of the Italian government to wind up Mare Nostrum? Do you think this is going to increase the number of deaths for migrants in transit? And also, more generally, what's the IOM's position on how European states have responded to the Syrian crisis? And also, sorry, a third question as well. With regard, you mentioned Sangatte, and a lot of asylum seekers try and make it to the UK, but tend to get sent back because of Dublin regulations. Does IOM think that there needs to be reform and discussion, especially amongst the northern European states, on Dublin regulations?
So on the Mare Nostrum, I mean, we've consistently been praising the Italian government for the huge effort they've made and for the huge amount of money they've spent on it, primarily on saving lives. We've been disappointed, as have many in the Italian government, that the burden-sharing mechanisms of the European Union haven't rallied round and haven't ensured that it could be continued. And there's clearly a change. There's clearly a difference of opinion within the European Union, and they've settled on increasing Triton. And Triton is a border protection agency rather than a life-saving agency. Although, as they will tell you, as they have told us, they also save lives because that's their obligation at sea if there's people being lost at sea. But they're within territorial waters rather than out in the high seas. And we have been saying consistently it's not good enough that you withdraw the life-saving capacity that it's clearly possible, especially given the relatively low cost of it compared to the size of Europe and compared to the scale of the problem. You also asked me about Syria. Just remind me of the question, if you don't mind.
So yeah, there's been a lot of criticism from Council of Europe's High Commissioner on Human Rights about the reaction of member states to the Syrian crisis.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've been encouraging member states to take more and to relocate more, and we're working closely with the German government, for example, people who've been given refugee status, and we help resettle them. IOM works very closely with UNHCR in that sort of regard. You also ask about the Dublin Convention. Well, that's not really one for us to go into. I mean, that's more of a interior ministers of the European Union to look after. We're more interested in the fate of the migrants, the perception of migrants, the increasingly hostile perception of migrants within the body politic of Europe, and we're doing a lot of work to try and change that. If you want to hear about it, I'll tell you about our social media campaign, but you're probably not interested. But we're particularly interested in the kind of increasingly negative perception of migrants, often seen through the prism of those who are irregular migrants, who, for reasons which are not their fault, are perceived as being a drag on the society when they're anything but.
But just to follow up on that, sorry, the Dublin regulations are, as has been widely criticised, often sending migrants back to asylum systems which can't handle them, like in Bulgaria or in Greece. So shouldn't this be something that either AOM should have an opinion on?
Well, the Dublin Convention is a treaty within the European Union, so that's not it's not our mandate, it's not our place to critique it. And I'm not sure that I agree with your analysis, but I'll gladly talk to you about it afterwards.
Thank you. Dulcie, and then Errol.
Yeah, thanks very much. I wanted to go back to the discussion about the Facebook pages and the smugglers. So who is creating those Facebook pages? Do you have any information on that? And are they concentrated in the Sahel region, in Chad or Niger? Because that's a big route up through Libya. So if you could, shed any light on these Facebook pages. Thanks.
I mean, don't please construe this as an attack on Facebook. On the contrary, because as much as Facebook may contribute and facilitate the smugglers, it also facilitates people who are escaping from trafficking. And IOM has worked with numerous cases in which people have contacted their friends through Facebook, etc. So it's a neutral space. But what we know is that across Africa, there are Facebook pages to be found which will advertise the services of smugglers to enable people to get out of there. We also think that it's just a reality of the new media that you'll find in some fly-blown town a tin shed where one thing is working, and that's the internet cafe. And in one corner you may find the smuggler recruiting people, and on a few booths down you may find people who just sold the family farm trying to get out. And a little bit over there, you may find somebody who's just lost family members. So it's a new medium, it's a new way of communicating, and a lot of activity is happening through it. And we think we should be aware of it. We ourselves, IOM, is trying to see how we can use it to channel the authoritative voices of those who've been bereaved back to persuade people not to take these risky journeys. We've tried countless different ways. Information campaigns are very difficult when somebody's determined to leave what they perceive as the abysmal life they've got for the bright lights of the city. You're all sitting here. Maybe that's what brought you here. But seriously, we're trying to see how we can potentially use social media to turn back, to help persuade people to take different avenues in their life. They don't listen to us, why would they? But they probably will listen to families who have lost people, because they are the authoritative voices. The family of Palestinians who lost 23 surely is an authoritative voice, and we're working, in various ways to try and communicate that back to those who are seeking to migrate.
Great. Errol?
Yes, just first a follow-up from Stefano's question in the sense what should be done from the point of view and from the point of United Nations. Are you saying that you practically lost all major fights, and especially now expressing the social media impact? Can you do something with the Facebook, using Facebook as well, and beside those grim voices from the families and their experiences? And number two, if I may, although that is the mandate for the refugee agency, how would you judge or address the issue of the refugees in Turkey and the Turkish government dealing with them. It is not migrant issues, but could be tied as well.
You will not draw me on issues that are not migrant issues. I'm sorry to tell you. But seriously, on the Facebook issue, I mean, we do our best. We're recognizing that this is how people are communicating. It's, what's happened is it's speeded up the rate at which people can get information about getting out of a hard place. So therefore, it's probably not a bad idea to see how you can work with the same people and see if you can bring another voice to the discussion. We know we're not going to stop them, but perhaps we can say, do you really want to lose your everything your family's ever worked for and your life? What situation your family going to be in if that happens? How we do that, I mean, it's a challenge, but we think the voice of those who have been bereaved is one potentially strong avenue. We also think potentially the social media companies could play a role here. They could support us as we do this.
Thank you.
What about Turkey?
As I said, you're not going to draw me on issues which are not related to migration.
Matthew.
Sure. I just wanted to ask you about this. There seems like the U.S. Defense Department, DARPA, is doing some kind of big data project on just this topic, looking at analyzing publicly available data on ads. They're looking at sex trafficking, but they're basically trying to use things that are out there to identify patterns. And I just wonder, is this a direction IOM is moving into, to actually try to do this investigation? What do you there's some banks that have signed up to turn over financial records if they think they indicate trafficking activity. Are you making the call, or are you going to go forward and try to actually crack some of these rings?
Well, I mean, IOM works really closely with people who've been trafficked. And we do a lot of work, very finely tuned casework in this very sensitive area. Any help we can get from these social media companies in particular will be received with open arms, because we are very, very close to the problem, and it's a difficult and time-consuming and very confidential affair. And we certainly need support. There's no question about it. And we're identifying a new reality, which is that people, as one would expect, are turning to these forms of communication in order to leave countries, or they're being trafficked through these forms of communication. And we think it would be, a very good investment in a very good social investment by these social media companies to work with IOM.
Evelyn, that'll be it.
Leonard, did you say Eritrea has the largest number? They were leaving, did you say oppression?
I think that's what you'd call the situation, yeah.
Can you describe that? Or?
Well, that's more for our human rights colleagues, but
Yeah.
we know there are about 5,000 people a week leave Eritrea and end up usually in camps, sometimes for a long, long time, and they're not happy campers. And then many of them end up taking the route north, trying to get into Europe because of their desperate situation.
Great, thank you. And if you'll just bear with me, I was just handed a statement which I'll read out on Somalia for the record. The Secretary General is outraged by the terrorist attack in Mogadishu this morning, which damaged a UN convoy, vehicles, and killed and injured several Somali bystanders and security personnel. He conveys his deep condolences to the families of those killed and wishes those injured a speedy recovery. As I mentioned, there were no UN staff amongst the casualties. The Secretary General emphasizes that there could be no justification for terrorism or such attacks. He reaffirms the UN's strong commitment to working with the people and government of Somalia to help rebuild peace and prosperity for all Somalis.
Great. Thank you so much.
And I'll see you this afternoon.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Yeah.
Excellent. Cheers.
You're very welcome. Please come. I do, yeah. Please, I've got one, I think. Not very
Send
many.
you an email.
Yeah. Do try and come to our event on Friday.
I will actually.
It's a whole new Leonard.
Evelyn.
I'll send you an email. Friday, yes. They present the book. Yes. What time is that event on Friday?